Hello, I'm Stephen Wells, the host of the Motoring Weekly podcast, focused on the Australian historic road and racing community. And this is episode 126. Over the last weekend, I attended day one of the Summer Festival, held by the Historic Sports and Racing Car Association of New South Wales. It was at the Sydney Motorsports Park out at Eastern Creek, and was a fabulous day despite being drizzly and wet. The second day certainly had much better weather, and I missed it. My plan for 2025 is to cover the HSRCA events in full, interviewing officials, drivers and others at each race meeting. So being at the event allowed me to test some of the microphones and observe the structure of the event in the way of timings. It was a great day with fantastic racing, and seeing some amazing cars being pushed hard was really entertaining. And this is real grassroots racing, with some historically important vehicles being used as they were designed, and there were cars there that I'd never seen before, which made the day even more enjoyable. First though, I think it's important to describe what the association does, and a bit of history. It was established in 1981 with the aim to preserve and restore some of the most important locally built and international racing cars and race them as they were intended. In a recent Motoring Weekly episode about the Australian Motor Heritage Foundation, the chairman, Hugh King, described how the foundation preserves old historic automotive documents, whilst the HSRCA preserves the actual vehicles. The association caters for cars from the early 1920s through to the racing and sports cars of the 1990s, and their race meetings regularly attract around 200 competitors, and they're hugely entertaining. As an example, there were 219 entrants for the 2024 Sydney Classic and 194 for this summer festival in an amazing range of machines. The HSRCA organises and runs major historic race meetings each year at Sydney Motorsports Park and Wakefield Park, now called One Raceway, near Goulburn. In addition, they hold regular club meetings, social events and club plate runs for historic road cars. It is a very well-run association with a strong membership. I know a lot of long-term members, which says a lot about how successful it is. But let's cover off the classes that the cars race under. There are 16 main classes, starting with Group A, touring cars with a competition history between 1984 and 92. Group C are touring cars with a competition history between 73 and 84. Group F are the historic Formula Ford cars. Group FJ are the historic Formula Junior cars. Group J are cars with a competition history up to 1930. Group K are cars with competition history between 31 and 1940. Then Group L, racing, sports racing or clubman cars from 1941 to 60. Group M are the racing and sports racing or clubman cars from 1961 to 65. Group N are production touring cars. Group O are more racing and sports racing or clubman cars from 66 to 69. Group P are the racing and sports racing or sports cars with early aero from 1968 to 72. And Group Q are the racing, sports racing or clubman cars from 1970 to 77. Group R are racing, sports racing or sports 1300 cars from 79 to the mid-80s. And Group S are production sports cars made up of three subclasses: A, which are pre-1961, B, 61 to 69, and C, 1970 to 77. And then finally, Group U are the sports sedans pre-1986, and Group V are the Formula V cars. The racing is grouped together based on a number of entrants. As an example, at the Summer Festival, Groups L, M, O and P were together. In other words, all the racing, sports racing and club cars were out on track together. There was only one entrant for Group M, for example. But let's also talk about the types of racing, because they have three different types of racing. There's the traditional scratch race. This is a classic grid lineup, and the first past the checkered flag is the winner. A qualifying time provides the place on the grid. Very traditional, and most of the time that's the racing that people see. But then they also have super sprints, and this is an event where the drivers are released at intervals and record their own times. They're not competing against each other on track, but against each other on the timesheet instead, with the winner setting the fastest lap time. And then they have the regularity events, and they're different again. The driver sets a time in qualifying and then has to match that time on each lap. Points are lost for each tenth of a second variance, so it's all about consistency.
They started coming out of the...
So what was the summer festival like? I got down there by 8 a.m. so that I could see the early action, which was actually delayed for 15 minutes to clear up standing water from the overnight rain. The morning was drizzly and wet as each set of groups had their qualifying sessions before the first races, which were the Group S, followed by the sports sedans and then the Formula V classes. Whilst the morning races were on, I did an interview with Dr. Michael Henderson, the inventor of the 6-point harness, and I'm really hoping it's okay considering the racing going on right outside the window. In the afternoon, there were 11 races for the different classes in drying conditions. The great thing about Sydney Motorsports Park is that you can get to many parts of the circuit to see the action, and above the garages, which is where I was, is an open area that gives you a view of most of the circuit with only a couple of corners out of sight. Even better, if the wind is in the right direction, you get a heady mix of racing exhaust and hot biscuits, thanks to the Arnott's Biscuit Factory being close by. I absolutely recommend getting to an HSRCA event at either the Sydney Motorsports Park or the newly opened One Raceway in Goulburn. I can guarantee you won't be disappointed. But don't forget these upcoming events, which are a great way to get involved with the historic road and race community. On December the 14th, the Fast Lane Toy Run is in Sydney City and over to the Shannon's showroom in Artarmon. The Holden FJ FX Nationals are in Cleveland, Queensland on December the 29th. And then there's a Holden Day at the National Holden Museum in Coffs Harbour on January the 4th. The Bathurst 12 Hour is on January the 31st to the 2nd of February. But if you prefer your racing to be historic, then the HSRCA Return to Goulburn at One Raceway is on that weekend as well, February the 1st and 2nd. The GNU Blast Classic is on the following weekend, 7th to the 9th of February. And then the following weekend again, February the 15th, is the Motorfest Car Show by the Lions Club of Gerringong. And then 28th of February to 2nd of March is the Sydney Harbour Concours d'Elegance in the middle of the harbour. And then on the 8th of March is the Tea Gardens and Hawk's Nest Motorfest. And I can guarantee that'll be a good one because I've been up to that one several times over the last couple of decades. And if you have a club or event that you would like highlighted, send an email to stephen@motoringweekly.com.au and I'll be in touch. There are lots of events happening and I'm researching when and where so that Motoring Weekly listeners can plan to attend one or many of them. And don't forget to subscribe through your favourite podcast player, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Samsung or YouTube, and get the episodes delivered as they're published, or simply subscribe to the website motoringweekly.com.au and you can listen there. We are still bouncing in the automotive podcast chart for Australia from Podcharts, who collate listener numbers from different platforms. Having peaked at 35, and I'm working on getting into the top 10 next year. And I really appreciate all the listeners, and I really appreciate the time you spend listening to my content. I'm Stephen Wells, and you've listened to Motoring Weekly, the podcast for the Australian historic road and racing community.